Welcome everyone to another Beyond Bitcoin Hangout. Today is Friday, April 1st, 2016. We are joined today by Nick Gogerty of the SolarCoin project. You can look at the SolarCoin project's information more by going to www.solarcoin.org or www.electricchain.org. Now, with that said, how these normally start out is I like to start out with just a quick introduction from you, Nick. Give us a little bit of an information into what got you into cryptocurrency. Was it Bitcoin? Was it something else? And then where are you guys now in the SolarCoin community, and where you feel like you guys are going in the future? And we can go from there.
Sure thing. I'll give a little background about myself first, just so you understand who I am and the context. I have a deep background in technology, finance, and large-scale problems. I've worked with the world's largest hedge fund, have been a quantitative Forex analyst for one of the world's largest banks, was also chief analyst for a project called StarLab, which was modeled on the MIT Media Lab, where I was in the role of chief analyst. Our senior management team had Nicholas Negroponte on the board, two Nobel laureates. I was overseeing 3 schools of artificial intelligence, our nanotech fabrication, robotics lab, and our life sciences division in BizDev and IP capture back in 2000. Fast forward, I'm very interested in economically sustainable development. My first degree is cultural anthropology from the University of Iowa, and I have an MBA from one of the top French engineering schools, one of the Grand Écoles. I've lived in half a dozen countries. I am an Ivy League author and guest lecturer for fun, because I love to teach at Columbia University's exec MBA program on innovation and macroeconomics. So that'll just kind of qualify a few things about me. In terms of geek cred, I drafted a paper way back in the day on year 2000 for fun when I was living in London, trying to understand the international problem and network effects. Within 8 weeks, I was called in by the US Senate to be one of the world's experts, the world's largest technology problem. The other experts testifying before the US Senate were representatives from the DoD, the CIA, the World Bank, and the State Department. Anyway, that's who I am. I'm a nerd. I love big problems, big tech problems, and just love to get shit done and make things. So I'm going to jump to SolarCoin. First of all, so I'm an author of a book. Yeah, I'm author of a book on macroeconomics. Used to be an analyst in renewable energy for a hedge fund in New York, a very small one, tiny one, not a big bucks, big banker guy as much as it sounds like I might be. And in 2011, I drafted a paper on how you can make a currency backed by energy. At the time, I wasn't aware of Bitcoin. We fast forward to 2014, I realized that you could effectively have a currency represented by energy using Bitcoin. So effectively, with my friend and co-founder, set up the SolarCoin project. SolarCoin right now is a basic token. It's a clone with a message field in it. We use the POST algorithm, so we're extremely low carbon. We've done our carbon analysis on the blockchain. Won't go into all that, but we are, as a POST, have an extremely low carbon footprint. The Bitcoin community has expanded out. You can think of how it works and what it is. It's air miles for solar energy generators globally. There's a massive pre-mine, and I'll get into that and what it's doing and how we're trying to, decentralize and hand control over to the community. That pre-mine represents 98 billion tokens. Those are non-circulating. The wallets are published, and each one of those tokens will be given out in exchange for the production of 1 megawatt of solar energy. To date, we have participants in 18 countries who are actively claiming solar coins. Within 6 weeks of the launch of the project in 2014, we were written up by the New Scientist and Scientific American as one of the most interesting uses for the blockchain. We have partners who are developing what we call affiliate relationships to verify and distribute SolarCoin globally. So you have to have someone or a means of verification of the process that solar energy has been generated so that the person, can claim their solar coins. And so to that end, we have 2 primary affiliates. One that is has their development work spread across Tel Aviv, Berlin, and Barcelona. And the other one is Tokyo-based, handling primarily Asia. We are on the cusp of launching these new websites. They are called Sol Crypto and Global Solar Change, respectively. Those are the projects. We have some partnerships and some things under the hood where we think the community is going to grow huge. There's something that's interesting. I won't go into detail now, but your community may be interested in what drives the value of a currency. The book I authored is called The Nature of Value. It's an academic book. It's not extremely popular. That being said, I will tell you that it is being read and has been gotten some accolades. I've received personal feedback from some multi-billion-dollar hedge fund managers who really like it. So it's not CNBC, but if you're into understanding how finance and economics works, it's interesting. All right, I'm going to keep moving on. So SolarCoin is launching. It's rolling out. It will scale from the tiny network that it is today of a few hundred participants. We anticipate growth to be on the order of 1 to 3 orders of magnitude this year. Have no idea where in that space, but we think it's going to be a very exciting year. We're rolling out a new version and a fork soon, and then anticipate mobile wallets using Coinomi and the CoinoPay tech. That's SolarCoin. I want to move on to electric chain. So SolarCoin is a basic token, etc. It's meant to incentivize solar energy for the next 40 years globally, and it's just given away for free if you can prove that you've generated 1 megawatt of solar energy. And again, we are in talks with some of the larger solar energy producers in the US and around the world to distribute this to grow our network of participants and end users. The Electric Chain project is a spin-off of SolarCoin, and it is an open source project environment where the main thesis is how can we get energy data onto a blockchain, and solar energy data specifically. The reason that's such an interesting thing is that global solar energy data, there are 7 million solar energy generators in the world, panels, farms, etc., rooftops. Every one of those is effectively an instrument looking at the sky. Okay, it's measuring energy. It's measuring energy relative to what should be there relative to the weather and what the instruments are producing. To that effect, we're looking at producing the world's largest open scientific instrument. The more data we can get on a chain, or we're talking with IOTA and a group called Grid and Singularity and others, this data can then be used for microclimate analysis, pollution analysis, and also the uptime and reliability of the components, namely the inverter and the panels behind the project. The project was conceived in late January. Within 8 weeks, I had done an informal launch at MIT, and we are in talks with members of both NASA, and we have 3 observers from Xerox PARC who are watching the project. We have a Slack right now that reflects all the sub-projects on Electric Chain, so I invite you, if you want to join that. If you're a good coder, hacker, we'd love the skills, join the projects. The projects and proposed projects are not guaranteed yet. I don't want to overstate things. Involve everything from working with NASA to getting potentially the first blockchain transaction in space. Again, this is a proposal we're working on. One of the NASA people actually put this forward. We also have some people working on microgrids in the developing world. Part of my background is actually, my first degree is sustainable economic development, cultural anthropology. So I'm very interested in using this technology for good. And so the Electric Chain has lots of cool potential. Again, we have 2 things. Right now, the pre-mine on SolarCoin, which again, you can debate the fuzziness, the economics, or the hand-waviness of it, reflects a potentially the world's largest solar energy, private sector solar energy incentive. At north of $2.5 to $3 billion. The Electric Chain could become the world's largest world's largest Earth monitoring instrument for monitoring things in real time. The idea, again, is the Electric Chain is an open source science type project, and then if commercial or other business models spin off of it, that's great. And we're technology agnostic on the Electric Chain, but we do hope to be able to use that Electric Chain technology to help grant the solar coins. We've got probably about a dozen people who are hanging out doing the hardcore development, who are affiliates, etc., and then a number of parties joining the Electric Chain Slack and other areas. And that's it.
Well,
Questions?
it sounds like you guys have a huge list of things that are going on.
Yes, and
I
would invite others to, again, jump in the pool if you want to.
certainly. There are some things that I would like to say, but I'll bring up first. I like to see what the community who joins in uh, has to say. Have any questions, comments, concerns, anything that you guys would like to bring up to Nick? Oh, there's one
Yeah.
question in here. Joey asks, how do you prevent scammers lying about their generated watts?
Correct. And this is one of the challenges that we work with the affiliates. I'll explain it the following way. Security runs on a continuum from ease of use to secure. And so what we do is we scale the response or the verification process for our claimants accordingly. So if you just have a rooftop and 5 kilowatts on there, right now the amount of coins you're claiming is fairly minimal. So taking a picture of your meter, submitting some general information works. If you have a solar farm, we are looking at, and this is part of our partners are looking at developing hardware solutions that actually integrate directly into the inverter. These are called data loggers. And so you have a direct feed where we literally link the sun to a blockchain. And so that's going on right now. We are in partnership in discussions, with a partner called SunSpec, which represents 70 of the world's largest inverter manufacturers and 968 megawatts of production in the US. So the other thing is most solar installs have this inverter/meter to measure production. Most of them have an IP out to the dashboards so that the homeowners can see what's going on. So as we grow, we will end up partnering with these monitoring companies and developers and getting live data feeds. Again, so literally the sun shines, we read it in and grant out solar coins on the back end.
That's cool. Now, what kind of blockchain technology are you using for this? I know that you said that you guys are trying to be technology agnostic, but the blockchain itself has an underlying protocol, right?
Correct. And so the underlying, the consensus algo is we're using POST. We have a developer, a great guy named who helped you Vericoin. So we started out as Litecoin and then went, with a proof of work and immediately, as quickly as we could, got to a POST, which is proof of stake time, to reduce the carbon footprint, which is, kind of in line with the mission of the
Definitely.
group.
It's good to see that you guys have thought about just those little things. But now you said proof of stake time. That is slightly different than just normal proof of
Yeah, it's
stake. So
stake,
how is
right.
that?
It's basically how do you weight the effective stake, and it's got a logarithmic weighting for the that decays relative to the amount of time that you've had. So your let's say vote for the reward is a function not just of the absolute stake, but also the time in which that stake has been in the account, and that's done to basically incentivize people, to transact. One of the theories we have on currency, and my own personal theory, is that currency is actually I'm going off on a tangent here if you don't mind, but currency is a social protocol. So if you took all, and there's a video on the SolarCoin.org site that kind of explains this. Currency as it's known, let's say if you fiat, Bitcoin, etc., even gold, if you consider currency as having function, has no intrinsic value. You can't redeem it. You can't necessarily spend it. It does, however, represent value. And so I'm going to explain what I mean by that. To the degree that a currency or a token is tradable with others, it has some value if you can exchange something. So SolarCoin, like all currencies, is a belief system. It's a social protocol. Some social protocols you're familiar with are dollars, euros, yens, etc. The interesting thing is if you take a little economics here, the M0 equivalent of currency, notes, bills, etc., in circulation, and you divide it, you call that the market cap, and you divide it by the number of people you anticipate would accept that protocol. Okay, so for gold, it's probably 6 billion people out of the 7 billion, right? If you showed up with a piece of gold, they'd say, yes, this is worth something, right? There'd be some discount.
Yeah.
You do that. You do that for Bitcoin. You do that for dollars. You do that for yen, for euros. What you find is that every user on that network who's an acceptor ends up supporting effectively $1,000 to $2,000 in value. The current estimated number of participants in Bitcoin active is about 3 million. Okay, you can argue it's 4, it's 2.5, whatever. It's from Juniper Research. I don't know what the exact number is, but let's say you have 4 million, 3 million. 6 billion in market cap divided by 3 million gives you $2,000 per user. Most currencies, if you can make an estimate of the user or yeah, this is interesting. So if you look at the user participation rate of most of these currencies, whether they're alts or other forms of currency, such as gold, euro, yen, you can kind of work back. They end up having the same approximate function or functional value per node on that network, right? So there are super nodes. There's like Overstock, which takes a lot, but just the aggregate network. Now, here's kind of the cool thing I'm going to go into about that. The utility function, what drives the value. I'm not talking about the price of a currency. Price and value are different things. And that's in my book, or if you want to read Warren Buffett, he'll explain that. But the value of a currency is made up of two forms of economic utility: speculative and transactional utility. Speculative is just people think it's going to go up, so they buy it. It's hype, it's this or that. And speculative utility occurs in all currencies, right? Whether you're a Forex dealer or a guy launching his own coin with a bunch of story and wind behind it. Transactional utility is the one we find interesting because it's made up of how many people can you transact with. It creates the fungibility or the utility to transact with. So if only, like fax machines, if only one person accepts the protocol that you have, there's limited utility there. If 1 million people accept it, there's greater utility. So here's the cool thing about SolarCoin. Right now, if you join our network, there are maybe 500 people there, reflecting roughly the $1 million, worth of market cap. We anticipate adding significant numbers of people to this network in terms of SolarCoin participants. If you come on the network with an average home right now and you go sell your coins, you're a mercenary effectively. You don't want to hold on to them or trade them, you just dump them. Just you being a participant on the network are creating more value than what you're claiming. And I'll explain why that's interesting in a moment. So what that means, and you have to remember, is if your SolarCoin is a solar energy producer, our network is going to be stable and growing because you will be receiving SolarCoins for the anticipated 20 to 30 year production life of your rooftop. So we have a relationship with you for 20 to 30 years. It's like if every 6 months you get a letter in the mail that says, here's a little piece of free money, you'll probably take it. That's interesting from a whole host of reasons. It's interesting because it reduces fraud. So you wouldn't cheat or come up with bogus numbers because you might get caught out and give up your next couple of maybe a decade or two of future earnings. The other nice thing I'm going to go into fraud is that solar energy is easy to estimate how much is going to be produced on an annual or biannual basis just by knowing the latitude. So you can make a fairly simple back of the envelope calculation and see if somebody's varying extremely from that, and then kind of look into and investigate the fraud. So
this is really, if you don't mind if I interrupt just for
interject.
one moment, because Joey D asked a question, and this is kind of how we do this. If Joey can't speak up, he can type his question and I'll ask it for him, so you can and you're on this topic already.
Okay.
And he says here, but there is an incentive to the scam though. So would that also include checking with other measurements or compare to others in the neighborhood?
Yes, we will do that if possible. So right now what we do is we check against your facility, and it's like, hey, if you say you have 5 kilowatts on your rooftop, maybe Google Earth will tell us, hey, if this address is correct, if we have a live inverter. Over the course of a year, if you're north, 10 or 20% out, either from your neighbors or the rated kilowatt capacity of your rooftop, it's going to show up. So we'll kind of know that. Now, the big scammers, or the risk of the big scammers are these big farms, etc. And on that level, what we do is literally we'll have these data loggers that plug in. And so we're doing stuff down at the firmware level. And so if you know anybody with solar panels, etc., you can have them fill out the form on our site. Right now, it's a manual process. We're working on automating it to claim the SolarCoin. If you refer them, you get a 10% of their initial claim. And the first claim right now for SolarCoin goes back to 2010. So you can claim all the way back to 2010, and then you'll be granted on an ongoing forward basis. Does that answer the question?
Joey, do you feel like that? Well, there you go. Joey didn't have another question. That's amazing. So you answered it definitely sufficiently.
Okay. Okay.
Hadrian,
Sorry, I tend to go too deep. Yep.
no, you're fine. You're fine. I actually like listening to you. I just want to
Okay.
make sure that because it's obvious as you're speaking, others in our group are moved to ask questions and make some comments. So I try to occasionally plug
Mhm.
them in there because our format here is slightly different than like a common interview. We want it to be something where you don't have to go to a conference and you can be a pundit, right? You can learn from the top crypto experts in the sphere and become an expert yourself because that's how I'm an expert partially is surrounding
Totally.
yourself by other experts. So that's kind of what we do here. But anyway, real quick, Hadrian says here, are you
Great.
expecting huge advancements in solar technology in general in the near future?
Yeah.
If so, do you foresee a mutually beneficial relationship developing now between SolarCoin and tech companies?
Um, I guess yes and yes is the answer. And here's something I'll share that's fascinating about technology. You guys all know Moore's law, right? And that's expressed in
Hmm.
chips per unit of time, typically as a log curve. The fascinating thing in the 4 years of research I did for my book was that every technology has a Moore's law equivalent. The way to express it correctly is as units of value ship, there is a percentage decrease in cost. Okay, so what that means is every time I double the unit production of a thing, whether that's beer, polyvinyl chloride, iron, steel, or solar panels, there is a percentage cost drop that follows pretty much a log curve. This is fascinating. You can look it up. There's a Santa Fe Research Institute. If you look for the performance curve database, you can see it across 80 or 90 things. The economy is a giant machine, an innovating machine that's constantly optimizing. Now, for solar, there's a law called Swanson's law. For every doubling of watts shipped, cells shipped, costs drop 18 to 22%. And that's why a panel that costs in '05 is now 80 cents or less, depending on where you're at. So it's a profound curve. And what's going to end up happening is the relationship between energy production, and information, and managing energy is going to become more important and more profound. And solar energy specifically is going to become important because as storage gets cheaper, because it'll follow similar law, you'll have these large grids that we're used to in the developed world start to kind of bifurcate and potentially end up in more microgrids. And managing those, maintaining their stability with a mix of storage and generating processes will require more information. And this is a big market. The world's largest market is energy, and it's going to get very, very interesting. And the developing world may do this stuff first because they will start from the bottom up with microgrids.
And they'll have a reason.
So we're working. Exactly. I mean, in the U.S. we have cheap energy, with 99.99 uptime at 6 cents a kilowatt hour, right? You go to India and it's some guy running a diesel generator in the village, of which there are 600,000, and he's effectively got a price of 90 cents per kilowatt hour, and uptime of when he feels like it. So there's a
Yeah, essentially.
lot of opportunity for huge change there, and a lot of that change is going to be driven by, frankly, just infotech managing that. There's actually even a microgrid project in Brooklyn where some people are generating power on one side of the street and then selling it to the other side of the street using a blockchain. And that was at the shown at the MIT Blockchain and Energy presentation, where we launched the electric chain back in February 22nd.
I have a question. I'm not up to date on solar panel technology. Can you tell me if silver is going to continue to be heavily used in that industry?
I don't know, and I can't speak effectively to the intensity of silver. I know anything that is costly, and silver is primarily used for the interconnects, is going to be driven out or minimized. So everyone is trying to push cost out because effectively every solar cell is a commodity. And so I can't really speak to silver specifically. You are correct. There are lots of new techs, right? So whether it's adaptations of silicon itself, CAD-TEL, other stuff, it's all out there. The amazing thing I will tell you is if you bet on a tech or you bet on a technology company, that technology will be as good as the Swanson's law curve. And I write about this in my book. So literally the same way Intel looks at Moore's law and they say, okay, we got to amp our chip production up at X rate, to be competitive. Same thing with any solar tech that you see or want to invest in.
Could you type in the title of your book, please?
It's called The Nature of Value, and there's a website called thenatureofvalue.com. It's published by Columbia University Press, 2014.
I have a question. So, Nick, I want to thank you for showing up and coming here and explaining your project. It sounds really cool, and it's also cool that it's very close to the name of my currency. So I take a fondness to it. I guess.
Okay.
You said what?
I just said okay.
Okay, cool. So, what I want to know is, because I'm hearing this, and I guess you might have explained this, but I'm trying to see: is this just for people who have solar panels, or is this like is SolarCoin supposed to be used for more than just I guess retaining the coin as some kind of share or some kind of bond, or is it supposed to do more along the lines of allowing people to actually transact, or is that something that's just that you hope to happen organically?
Correct. We've used SolarCoin as literally it's a token, it's a currency effectively to the degree that anyone wants to trade it, and it's fully fungible. And so you can think of the solar energy generation aspect. We basically consider all currencies to have a positive externality, i.e. the more people that use it, it generates the value of the currency. So the only we use, like Bitcoin used proof of work to distribute the currency, right? The rewards. We are effectively using proof of real world work to distribute this currency. But to the degree that anyone wants to join the network and either accept the currency, so in exchange for a discount if you're a solar provider, or use it as any other form of currency, totally welcome. Another aspect is the proof of stake has a 2% annual rate of return.
Okay, I see. I think what I'm hearing is that there isn't actually a roadmap to get this thing being used as a currency. You're just assuming that that's going to happen, and for now, it's going to play more like a share.
I guess I wouldn't say a share, and the reason I wouldn't say that is because a share specifically assumes a claim on something. And so effectively, we treat this as a circulating currency. It has no redeemable function at this point. So it's just an open currency that there are two ways to get it, right? You could go buy it at one of the exchanges, or you just earn it as a producer of solar energy. And our primary interest really is to have people earn it and grow the network and be a participant. Obviously, people want to speculate or do things, that's fine. We don't have any relationships with exchanges, and we try to stay as, the SolarCoin Foundation, which is registered as a public benefit corp, tries to stay as neutral as possible.
I see. Right, because I see I see what you're talking about, and yeah, using the word share is probably not the best word to use. I guess when I hear the word currency, I think of adoption, using things as commerce. So I like to hear because that's a big thing, right? In cryptocurrencies, that we're all trying to get these things being used every day by people, like actually being used, not just like talking about it, but actually doing it. So I like to hear what developers, especially with one such as your skill set, having an actual idea of who we're going to be gearing this, or what kind of roadmap that this looks like. Okay, these group of people are going to use this, and then maybe from there we're going to jump to this group of people to kind of try and use it, and just like building that that road that gets us to wherever we're trying to go.
Let me answer the question. again, we view this all as a network, and we view even currency as a network protocol that just happens to be accepted by people. So to the degree that I own SolarCoin or don't, you know, is less important than I believe or I'm willing to accept them. And so, you know, we would argue that, and again, doing all this stuff is a very chicken and egg thing. The value of a network is a combination of two things: the number of nodes on the network, and then the flow across that network. And in a currency, that's buyers and sellers or traders. And not necessarily when I mean traders, I mean you're trading X currency for Y thing, and actually economy with an exchange of real value for the units. So our first startup is, you know, trying to resolve that chicken and egg thing of, you know, how do you get the currency out there in an equitable way? That's all about the SolarCoin reward mechanism. We are under the assumption that, like most complex adaptive systems or evolving systems, if there's a good, critical, stable base of people and claimants in a network, the utility value of the currency will emerge. You know, people will use it as either a store of value or a unit of exchange. And so there's really more of an organic thought to that. I will say the following: solar energy, depending on the year, grows at 20 to 40% annually. And right now there are 7 million solar facilities globally. And so we are geared for and aligned for rapid growth in the future, and tied to, you know, a lot of the industry participants. And so our goal is have a very focused message with that group. And then obviously if others want to participate, you know, great, use the currency for what you can. To the degree that others buy or engage in using the currency and create value, they push the value for the currency up, right? There's more demand function. The cool thing about this is that the more demand there is for the currency, if the value and / price goes up, the currency effectively acts as that much of a greater incentive for solar energy production. So if I was on the fence about, you know, putting something up on my roof, and, you know, I looked at the costs and all this, if I'm comfortable and I think that SolarCoin has a good value, let's say it's at $20 per megawatt hour, I might factor that into my cost to put panels up on my rooftop. And that's the ultimate hope.
It becomes a
that,
game
you know,
where
it
you become a
becomes a marginal
miner.
incentive.
Yeah, okay, so I'm seeing that. So Nick, you guys would probably, as a business move, you guys would probably look partner with maybe solar, and you probably talked about this already. Partner solar panel creators, maybe to market that or push something like that.
Yeah, our partners, and this is part of the team. You can go to Sol Crypto and Global Solar Change sites, our affiliates. They are actually actively outreaching to the developers. So not necessarily the manufacturers, but the guys who show up at your roof and say, hey, I'll put this on your rooftop. And these guys will then come along and say, well, I want to differentiate myself from the guy down the street who does the same thing. You'll get these SolarCoin in addition to your production. So we're in talks with those. So, you know, the ideal companies for us are, let's say, the Sun Edison, the Solar Power, Solar City type of companies. You know, the massive giants in the space. And we're already in talks with some people, I can't mention names, you know, some smaller ones and some large ones to get things launched. To put this in context, again, based on our market cap and our size, you know, we have a tiny network, very, very tiny network. We are designing infrastructure for scale at a significant level. And we'll be talking to those developers even more in depth. Again, I can't go into a lot of the stuff just because some of it's, you know, yeah.
Are you guys, you're talking about infrastructure that scales, like pretty much inevitably, right? I mean, indefinitely.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a 40-year project, right? This was viewed as an ambitious project. So the pre-mine reflects, you know, the anticipated solar energy generation, you know, of the planet effectively for 40 years. So it's a big number.
Yeah, you know.
Yep.
But that's
something,
actually good, Fuzzy.
Go ahead.
In my opinion, Nick, I have no problem with, and I especially like the way that you went about with the social, how you know, monetary systems are really social systems and can be looked at in that way, and I agree with that. You know, and in the way that you described that, and I see what you're doing is a 40 definitely a 40-year, it's a long-term project. And when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, there's nothing, what we've seen over the last 77 years, there's nothing to suggest a human being versus an algorithm. An algorithm can do a better distribution than a human being could. There's nothing to suggest that.
Correct.
So,
And we want to move that way as quickly as possible. So we're in
right.
talks with, on the electric chain, in terms of data handling, there's a project called IOTA, which instead of using a blockchain, uses something which is a tangle, which is basically it's a self-pruning Merkle tree, and some other solutions, both to managing large potential data, and we're looking at a good DAO or other mechanism to handle both distribution and security of the pre-mine. So as much as we can make things algorithmic and decentralized, that's where we're going. We're trying to get there as quickly and as safely as possible.
Of course, that's what you want in the end. But starting out, obviously, you have to make the best decision that's right for your project and what you're trying to do. And all I'm saying is that is a legitimate way, as long as you're in an open market, a free market where your idea can compete with others. I think that's it seems like you got a good head on you, and that you are actually you guys are actually doing what you're saying you're going to do. So
we're trying as hard as we can, and one of the things we're doing is distributing the process of claims granting to affiliate parties, so that there can be country specific messaging, marketing. We publish, again, it's a very, I'm not going to make any judgments, but we're trying to be as open and transparent as possible about everything we're doing. And we recommend that all the participants, abide by local regulations and laws, et cetera, wherever they are, just because that's kind of the nature of our project. I don't want to cast a judgment on other projects, which, maybe for other reasons are private or other, trying to skirt regulation. Those are other agendas, and that's, I'm cool. Everyone has to do their thing. But that's just the nature of ours, is we're very transparent about, what we're doing, and trying to get the best technology and the best actors to participate.
Could you discuss the relationship of your project to other producers like wind and tidal?
Correct. I was, for a brief period of time, a renewable energy analyst in the financial sector here in New York. And I researched the potential for a wind coin, a tidal coin, a geothermal, etc. What you find is that SolarCoin, or solar, makes the most sense, because the goal is to grow a network and leverage the network of externalities. So, for example, if you had a wind coin, you'd end up distributing tokens or currency to, maybe 300 or 400 large wind farm project developers, right? It would all go to GE Finance, and other wind farm developers who are, running multi-$100 million projects. Less interesting. The nature of solar as a distributed individual means of generating power is really cool. Now, we have large projects online, and one of our advisors is in the process of building a 2 gigawatt project in Tunisia that's actually supposed to run underground and power Italy, or part of Italy rather. So we've got scale on both ends. We're thinking down to the micro grids and some massive infrastructure projects.
Yeah, it sounds. I'm just sitting here listening, and I've had some questions, but the questions that keep popping up just are so beautiful. Real quick, since we do own a cryptocurrency that is focusing on being a decentralized exchange,
Right.
it can scale pretty much indefinitely, theoretically anyway, from what the people who work on it have said. And we are at how many transactions per second currently? I thought it was somewhere around 200 or 300 on average, but it goes up way higher than that. Like 160K transactions per second. That's what's been tested now. And in addition, we're talking about transactions speeds of what, 1.5 seconds. And it can potentially get a little bit lower even than that. Or block times, yeah, okay. Does anybody want to speak up about the technology that is graphene? I mean, it sounds like a perfect project to potentially partner in some ways with SolarCoin's community in different ways. I mean, that's all we are, is different people trying to use the tools that we have to build what we need to build. So is there anything we could offer to help them? So yeah. So using a UIA could accomplish that? But the problem then is there are systems right now that there was a pre-mine, and it was actually like SHA-256, right?
Correct.
And those people are holding. Now you're a proof of stake. So I guess there really wouldn't
Correct.
be a downside if you guys wanted to have a UIA that was actually traded on the decentralized exchange and backed up by your tokens in some way, using a side chain of sorts.
Yeah, you have to excuse my ignorance. I'm not familiar enough with UIA to comment on if that makes sense. You guys probably know better than I do.
Oh no, you
Well,
know what it is.
This is one of those areas where, for the past 2.5 years, our community has really been focusing. Dan Larimer, who is one of the guys who actually, well, he is pretty much one of the big creators of graphene, which enables this stuff. And it enables far more too, but it's really kind of, you know how it is with code. You build your dreams, baby. Right?
Yep. Sometimes they
And that's
compile.
why we're all here. Because we're all dreamers, and there's so few places where we can sit and talk to all these googly-eyed people yet. But we're talking about side chains a lot. And I don't know if you're familiar with the concept.
Yes, I am familiar with the sidechain concept. Yeah. Okay.
Well, we figured that it would be best to have side chains, since we are focusing on becoming a decentralized exchange for all these amazing cryptocurrencies. So essentially their users don't get doxxed, right? I mean, that's one of the big things that keeps people from being in our cryptosphere, because they're just saying, my God, this is so dangerous and mysterious. And but when you have it set up so these different currencies, you wouldn't have to necessarily have an IOU on our exchange. You could actually have a sidechain built on, and based on the block times on your chain, it would. And I'm not an expert on this, but this is the general gist of it. Based on the block times on your chain, it would be able to go and directly transfer via some kind of multi-sig mechanism to a token that is your token on that exchange, and users can easily go in and out of it and back into the SolarCoin blockchain.
It definitely sounds like an interesting instantiation or an application, and to the degree that you guys would want to build something like that and work with SolarCoin to do that, I think it would be great. I will just say my own background. I get nervous around security laws violations, but maybe that's because I'm in the in the financial sphere. But to the degree that third parties are interested in using our blockchain and building apps on top of them, or cross-referencing or using a sidechain, sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah, it sounds interesting to me. And what we've kind of done is, We have BitUSD, we have market pegged assets essentially. So people who are holding SolarCoin could also uh, transfer it to BitUSD or something like that to a merchant outside of the SolarCoin network or something to that effect. There's a lot of potential here. That's why we kind of like to reach out, because we're in this awesome place where we have our focus and we can reach out to all you guys and kind of like all these different technologies and kind of say let's work together, and then we can trade it on our exchange too. Right, like
Yeah, sure.
that's and also we have worker proposals in the system, so people can actually create a worker proposal. Let's say SolarCoin wanted to do something to build a side chain. They said, yeah, it's going to cost us $30,000. We'd like to do that over the course of a year, and we'd like this much for it, and something to that effect. These things can happen in addition, and we like that because if SolarCoin has the people who go over and build it, they're building what they want. So those are the people who are experts in their area, and building something on the BitShares is just, you know, we're bringing these experts in who are
Yeah.
going to be able to understand that side.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting. I think it may be good to if someone from your community is interested in reaching out. I'd love to hand over introductions to our two affiliates in Tokyo and our Berlin/Tel Aviv based affiliate, because they do have some needs, some build out things, and so maybe there's some overlap there.
I would love to find overlap, but I would also love to hear if anybody else has any questions for Nick, because Nick, to be honest with you, I like to talk, but I'm liking listening to you more.
Okay. Well, feel free to fire questions out.
Nick, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Yeah, my name is Dan, and I am chairman of the FinTech Task Force for the National Society of Professional Engineers, and we are looking at blockchain pretty deeply as well, and again using a lot of the same proofs and mechanisms that you've mentioned here. Metcalfe's law, Moore's law, and so forth.
Sure.
And we're we've determined in actually we're building an alliance with the insurance industry, and trying to demonstrate insurability at all these different points in a blockchain and in an enterprise, as a form of financing them, because they have that problem of how do you finance these blockchain, or how do you insure these blockchain applications. So of course we determined that the Byzantine proof is insurable, the cryptographic handshake is insurable, as is the blockchain itself. But when it comes down to is Bitcoin or any of these currencies, are they money? They are not, at least until the UCC defines money otherwise. So you're kind of stuck, like you say, in that regulatory black hole. And then you have to ask, are they property? And at some point, that conversation fails as well. So we get to the point, well, how can you establish dominion over your dominion, or how can you challenge economic losses and so forth in a regulatory environment with these cryptocurrencies? And we're coming up with the keys. So if you own the keys, then you can now take possession or assert dominion and so forth. So as engineers, of course, our objective is to be the adjudicator of these smart contracts and the holder of keys along the way. So looking at electricity, what you're doing to me sounds like you're trying to build the mother of all black market currencies. But until the government falls, that's not the case. And I think it would be a very successful black market currency, actually. But until the government falls, we're still stuck in this regulatory environment. So we see something like energy as being, the value of energy is really contingent on all the things you can do with energy that you can't do without energy. And that is really the domain of engineering, and it's domain of what's being made that uses energy, what priorities of energy allocation are being asserted, and so forth. So we tend to think that value is trending more in the intangibles, what people are designing and building and creating together as an economy, rather than the thing that powers it. And maybe they're mutually agreeable, or maybe there's some bridge you can help me cross between the two, and that's exactly the bridge we do need to cross. So that's why I'm asking the question.
Okay, I'll just qualify my response. I'm not sure I quite fully understand the question. I will say, I don't know if we're making a black market currency. We're making a token. How that gets used, to be determined. We encourage, let's say, good actors, but obviously it's an open system, so things happen. Your other question was about, I guess, energy and value. At the MIT and Energy Bitcoin conference, one of the interesting things that Joy Ito, the head of MIT Media Lab, said was, there are only two things that you can send down a wire that now are one-off or can't be copied. And his interesting example is the internet is all about copying, right? I can copy anything, I can do anything. And the only things that can be sent down a wire that can't be copied right now are, in theory, Bitcoins or tokens, because in theory is inflation proof. You falsify the double spend potential, and energy. And he views those as very interesting overlap points. I will say there's a whole section or a thread that runs through my book on energy and energy utilization, and some things there that are kind of interesting. But I'm not sure I fully understood your question. Could you repeat in synthesis the real point you'd like me to address? Because I'm not getting it out correctly, probably.
Okay, well, we're saying that all value, value resides within an individual. Nothing economic can happen until two people get together and build something, and that's what an economy is based on. Money represents the productivity of people, and otherwise they wouldn't work in exchange for it. So these are some pretty fundamental. They're not based in high theory. They're not based in Cobb-Douglas functions or utilization profiles. It's just the law of the world, the law of the land. And that seems to be the underpinning dynamic we're trying to at least harness, especially among the builders and the makers, the people who actually build and make stuff. So we feel that they are the source of value rather than, of course, they're enabled by electricity. They're also enabled by music and recreation and governance, and they're enabled by many things. But isn't the store of value actually within people, within the social networks, rather than running down a wire? We can't assume that it's all localized. There's a huge localization characteristic, which I'm not seeing, other than decentralized energy, of course, which is beautiful. But that's what I'm trending towards, the value of the localization of energy.
Okay, well, I'll give you this response. A little background myself. As an undergraduate, I started out as business and economics, and within 6 weeks I quit. And took another major. And the reason was because most of economics was crap. Too many assumptions, too many, linear assumptions for a nonlinear world. And economics has a hard-on that it wants to be physics when it's really the social sciences and it's softer. And correctly to your point, all value is local, right? If everyone dies, nothing has value because it's all what we perceive. And money, which is an interesting thing, has sprung up almost universally as a means of facilitating value exchange, whether it's the big stone coins on the island of Yap, or shells, or you name it. Money is a useful, and specifically currency is a useful tool to represent and transfer value more efficiently. Those efficient flows across that network of participants are an economy, as you correctly identified. And so to the degree that your other questions about who produces value and who consumes it, that's all kind of how an economy is shaped, and what they're up to and what stage they're at. Right now, I'll give you an example. The S&P 500, nearly, I think last I heard, it's 30 or 40% of the S&P 500's value is in intangible assets, i.e. it's not stuff that's on the books. You can't, as my old econ professor said, an intangible asset is something you can't kick. And so a lot of it is our beliefs and our perceptions. It's the brand equity that's maintained by McDonald's or Coke and these other companies. And that's an interesting thing to be aware of, because we're effectively getting into an economy that's more about us manufacturing ideas and beliefs and perception and narrative than things. And it just seems to be the next evolution in what we're doing. I actually tried to put a chapter in my book on the post-economy, which is basically the thinking behind a post-singularity economy, which says what happens when all the things we make, effectively don't need us, in terms of the algos and the systems that keep our meta economy or meta system going. So there's an interesting thesis there. I mean, part of my Y2K work was on sustainability, and the reality is, we can't exist without our technology the way we exist today, right? Most urban environments would collapse, blah, blah, blah. So we're in an interesting area.
Well, when you mention most urban environments will collapse, part of that is base infrastructure. I mean, base infrastructure is the thing upon which an economy is built, and many of the these Bitcoin applications are just derivatives of the fact that this base infrastructure, the assumption that this base infrastructure is intact and viable. So we're seeing that as well as the insurance industry, that assuring that base infrastructure is what will ultimately assure these cryptocurrencies, and that's why.
Correct. I acknowledge that base infrastructure is as much static things as is the information that allows those things to operate efficiently. So, to the point, the internet as a physical thing is less interesting than the fact that all the transactions that allow, let's say, a store that has a 48-hour shelf time needs to get restocked. So that base infrastructure of information, which permeates our economy, is becoming ever and ever larger portion of it, is profoundly important. And I explained, I was talking to the number 2 guy at MIT on the Bitcoin thing. We were talking about, why will blockchain tech become more interesting? In my own thesis in the developing world. And the reason is the blockchain is a proxy at its highest abstraction of trust. And in countries or environments where trust fails, and for superordinate problems, government regulation, lending, long-term or large distributed services, where government fails or where trust fails, the blockchain can come in and do really interesting things.
Well, the engineers, professional engineers especially, have been the trusted third-party adjudicator for insurance and banking for 80 years. So this is really something we're familiar with. And for my work on NAFTA, of course, where countries don't have a professional engineering licensure project program or something which is sort of stands independent of UCC, then they tend to be less developed and they tend to actually collapse. They can't be insurable. You can't get the finance to them. So it still goes back to that that trusted third party. So we don't see it as a competition between engineers in blockchain or Bitcoin. We see more as a something that's symbiotic. So if we were to get engineers to be enabled by a blockchain, then we can assure that base infrastructure, which is upon which everybody utterly depends. And that's the objective of our work.
Totally agree. And the base infrastructure is really an interesting one, and the role of trust in maintaining it. I don't know if you know, but in the old days, Roman engineers, the way that they established trust was they'd have to sit or stand underneath a bridge that they built, physically underneath it, while the designed load, or troops or whatever went over it, right? And if it collapsed, it failed, and that's how you got trust in your design. There's a really interesting book for those who are interested in economics and trust called Why Capitalism Won in the West. And it's about a concept called dead capital by an economist named Hernando de Soto. And that is kind of hinted at by the project called Factom, Factom, about property rights and trust for the transfer of property. Profoundly interesting from an economic development opportunity. There's approximately a dead capital reflects about 9, probably up to north of $12 trillion of assets in the developing world that can't be realized because there's a poor chain of custody or trust in ownership. And so the same way, an engineer might provide trust of let's say, material or functional integrity of a thing, trust of ownership or proof of ownership is another area where blockchain tech will have huge impacts.
Here's what engineers do. During the time between actually starting to build something and the time when that thing creates revenue, so say it's a bridge. So there's a period of time where you have to design the bridge and build the bridge and pay everybody to build this thing all the way until the first toll can be charged. It doesn't exist on a balance sheet as an asset. except in proxy of the engineer's license. Okay, so the engineer's license is the thing which can keep something, an asset, on a balance sheet for a period of time prior to its ability to generate revenue. So it bridges that gap. It bridges the capitalization gap. So that's where money is, and for engineering, in fact, does behave like money. Now I know I know those guys at Factum, and I'm very familiar with Hernando de Soto's work, and they're the first ones to admit that we're building a black market currency, and I'm wondering if you're willing to admit that too.
I wouldn't say I'm building a black market currency. I'm building a token or a blockchain. How it gets used and even what the term black market currency means, again, is highly subjective. If I make something that's collectible, let's say I make Beanie Babies, and people swap Beanie Babies
that
for
could
values,
be a black market currency, buddy.
It could be a black market currency, and so it's kind of like
I buy all
context.
kinds of dirty stuff with those things.
Well, this is the thing: is there's the end utilization, and so.
Nick, I'm not saying it's bad, and this is a private session. You don't have to admit either. It's kind of where we can go here that we can't go elsewhere, and it's a brilliant one. As a matter of fact, it's a perfect one. As a matter of fact, and that's why
I'm loving this discussion.
I'm just jumping all the way to the end game, just so we can play and expand the ideas here.
Sure. Again, whatever this thing ends up getting used for, I don't know, etc. But my hope is more energy. The general assumption is more energy and more distributed energy, good. And fossil fuel or fossil-free energy, good. What ends up happening as an externality in terms of the token is a tough one to tell. The other thing that's quite interesting.
Out of curiosity.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I just interrupt real quick? This is along these lines, though. Dan Robles here in Genesis often talks about the sink for, the source and the sink for a cryptocurrency or a currency.
Exactly.
Actually, it's a game. All games.
Go ahead.
Well, what we're trying to get at is not only more energy and cleaner energy. Obviously, we're trying to save this planet, but we're also trying to get to
Which
prioritization.
Seems like it could do.
What gets built and what does not? Does human productivity get allocated towards more nuclear weapons and bigger walls and more guns that are irresponsibly contained, or is human productivity allocated more towards sustainability and so forth? That's even the bigger question. How do we shift human productivity? And as long as there are, like, for example, my big takeaway from NAFTA was it was very much in the best interest of all those trade parties to keep the engineers poor, weak, and disorganized, because that's how they control productivity. That's how they control money. And it was just criminal, and it affected me deeply. So I'm tending towards more the allocation side, whereas as Nick is talking about the energy side, and they're really, really close. So I'm not saying there's any disconnect at all here, but that's what
you're
I
kind
like
of
to
asking
bridge
him to
into.
expand on it.
Yeah, how does this change the allocation of energy? The energy is great.
I think, if anything, it effectively decentralizes it in a good way. And I understand what you're talking about. It's a macro issue of almost what you're calling a social equity and power distribution within a polity, which is beyond my conversation time window here. But I will say that SolarCoin, the fact that it incentivizes the individual to potentially make a choice about solar energy, I think is good. The trends we see and we believe in energy are cheaper storage, smaller units, smaller grids, and so we believe that we probably support that.
Okay, well, I can live with that. That sounds great, Nick.
And you kind of talked a little bit about it earlier, Nick, whenever you were saying essentially that you saw in third world countries, individual people would be able to have these. Right?
That's correct. I did some of my field work as an undergrad, some random visits, not serious field work, but in Niger, which is one of the world's poorest countries, north of Nigeria. Spent a month traveling between Chad and Mali out in the brush. A little bit of energy in a place like that can make a huge difference. Huge difference. I mean, it's the difference between
Oh, yeah.
having to carry a little bit of drinking water and having water piped in. So distributed energy and cheap energy that gets out there is fascinating. The computer in the developing world is called a smartphone. Those are getting cheaper. Those have huge impacts. I mean, you have no idea what it's. I mean, some of you do maybe. To have zero information, zero connection with the world, and then all of a sudden everything comes piped in on a mobile phone. It's
Yeah.
radical sea change. And then you combine that with the potential for information and energy and everything else, and you're literally looking at changing the world and changing the way potentially billions of people live. That to me is extremely interesting to potentially be a part of. We'll start it out as what looks like a rich world hobby, but the end implications may be most profound. For people I never meet, never see, but could do amazing things.
Well, there's a reason why
Well,
the engineers are hanging out here on the BitShares blockchain. And if you want to talk about that later, we could do that.
That sounds good. Reach out and we can discuss.
well, I will have to say right now, though, I would love this conversation to go another 3 hours. To be honest, we are going to continue having these hangouts. However, this is the positive aspect of this. However, we're sitting at about an hour and 6 minutes. It has been an amazing hangout. I would love to thank everybody here. And I would also love to ask everybody here to, oh, that's the wrong one here. I'm going to send you the guest book sign in. And just to log that you were here and that you participated, I would like if you would give your information. You have to give your email, that's optional, but just to kind of commemorate that you were part of Beyond Bitcoin today, and you were one of the reasons why it happened. And oh, go ahead.
No, I say sounds great. Thank you. I mean, I know that's for everyone, but
No, but it's for you as well, and that's actually what I was getting ready to say, Nick, is what I love to see is these kinds of conversations, and that's why I try to reach out to people who are passionate about blockchain technology, because all of the things that divide us generally are so small compared to what we have in common and what we're all trying to do in the end result. And one thing I've learned in my life and my experiences is that groups of people, if you listen and you all can have fair and honest discussions, it's a very powerful growing experience, and it's almost the foundation of what currency is about in mind, which is human interaction. So I just wanted to let you guys, thank you guys for that.
Your guest book
Yeah,
is
and I did
flawless.
send the wrong one.